there is a name that has survived 3,000 years without losing its weight, not because of a kingdom built or a dynasty that outlasted its founder, but because of a man who chose to die young and knew it, Achilles, the greatest warrior Greece ever produced, a soldier so feared that entire armies hesitated when they heard the Myrmidons were on the move, a man whose rage, once ignited, could turn the tide of a war. But here is the thing history tends to skip past. Achilles was not invincible, not really, and he knew that better than anyone. So why did he fight? That question sits at the center of everything. Not the heel, not the arrow, the choice made by a young man who had been told clearly that the battlefield would kill him, to go anyway. This is his story. The Greek world of the 12th century before Christ was not a peaceful place. It was a world of competing kingdoms, restless aristocracies, and constant war. A world where a man's worth was measured by what he could take and what he could defend. Into this world, in the region of Phthia, in what is now northeastern Greece, a boy was born who would define what it meant to be a warrior for the next 3 millennia. His father was Peleus, king of the Myrmidons, a people the ancient sources describe as unusually fierce, loyal to their leader, almost recklessly brave in battle. His mother was Thetis, a sea nymph, a nereid, half mortal, half divine. And from the very beginning, that tension between what was human and what was not would define everything about Achilles. Thetis loved her son with the kind of love that sometimes destroys what it tries to protect. She knew what the fates had decreed. Her son would either live a long, ordinary life and be forgotten, or he would die young on a foreign battlefield and be remembered forever. She wanted him to live. She did everything she could to make that possible. Some sources say she dipped the infant Achilles into the river Styx, whose waters were believed to make mortal flesh impervious to harm. She held him by the heel, just one heel, and that small, ordinary patch of skin would become the most famous vulnerability in all of ancient literature. Whether you take this literally or read it as metaphor, what it tells us is something real. No amount of protection, divine or otherwise, is ever complete. When Achilles was 9, a seer delivered a prophecy that changed everything. The boy would die at Troy. Thetis, desperate, did what desperate mothers do. She tried to hide him. She dressed Achilles as a girl and sent him to live on the island of Skyros at the court of King Lycomedes. It bought some time, but the Greeks needed him. A prophecy of their own said Troy could not fall without Achilles in the field. So Odysseus, cunning, relentless Odysseus, sailed to Skyros to find him. The story goes that Odysseus laid out gifts in the palace court: fine cloth, jewelry, ornaments, and among them a sword and a shield. The girls gathered around the cloth and the jewelry. One of them reached straight for the weapons. Achilles was found. He did not resist. This is the part worth sitting with. He was 17, perhaps 18. He knew what Troy meant, and he went. Before the fleet sailed, Achilles received one final gift from his mentor, the centaur Chiron, who had raised him in the forests of Mount Pelion, who had taught him to hunt, to heal, to play music, to fight. Chiron gave him a spear. The Pelian spear, they called it, a weapon so heavy, so perfectly balanced, that no other warrior in Greece could wield it. An ancient source claims a relic believed to be that very spear was preserved for centuries in the temple of Athena at the port city of Phaselis, and that Alexander the Great, who worshipped Achilles, visited that city and venerated it. There is something in that detail that says everything about the shadow Achilles cast across history. A weapon preserved for 1,000 years. A conqueror pausing to pay his respects to a man he considered his hero. The fleet sailed for Troy. 10 years. That is how long the war at Troy had been grinding on by the time the events of Homer's Iliad begin. 10 years of siege, of raids on surrounding cities, of men dying in the dust outside walls that would not fall. And Achilles, through all of it, had been the Greeks' most lethal weapon. He had sacked 12 cities by sea and 11 more overland. The Trojans did not face him in open battle if they could avoid it. But in the 10th year, something broke. It started with a dispute over a woman, as so many ancient catastrophes did. Agamemnon, the commander of the Greek forces, was forced to return a woman named Chryseis to her father, a priest of Apollo, after the god sent a plague through the Greek camp in retaliation. To compensate himself, Agamemnon took Briseis, Achilles' own prize of war, a woman Achilles had come to care for deeply. He did it publicly, deliberately, as a statement of authority. Achilles was beyond furious. This was not just an insult to a man. In the Greek world, your prizes were your honor made visible. To have them stripped away by your own commander in front of your own men was an act of public humiliation that demanded a response. Achilles withdrew from the war. This sounds simple. It was catastrophic. Without him, the Greeks began to lose ground. Hector, Troy's greatest warrior, calm where Achilles was volcanic, restrained where Achilles was wild, drove the Greek forces back toward their ships. The situation became desperate. Agamemnon sent envoys to Achilles with offers. Briseis returned, treasure, land, his own daughter in marriage. Achilles turned it all down. He was done, or so he thought. The Greeks kept losing. The Trojans pushed harder. And Achilles sat in his tent, watching, furious, at Agamemnon, at the war, perhaps at himself. He could hear the fighting. He could hear his countrymen dying. He still would not move. Then Patroclus came to him. Patroclus was more than a companion. He had been with Achilles since childhood, raised in the same household, after his own family sent him away, following a violent incident in his youth. The ancient sources describe a bond that most scholars today read as something between a brotherhood and a profound, devoted love. Whatever the exact nature of their relationship, and Greek culture in this era was less concerned with drawing those lines than we are, what is not in dispute is that Achilles cared about Patroclus more than he cared about anything else in the world. Patroclus could not watch the Greeks die anymore. He asked Achilles for one thing: "Let me take your armor. Let the Trojans think Achilles has returned. It might be enough to push them back from the ships." Achilles agreed, but he gave strict orders. Push them back from the ships, then stop. Do not chase them toward Troy. Do not try to be a hero. Patroclus put on the armor of Achilles, the divine armor forged by the god Hephaestus, more beautiful and stronger than anything a mortal smith could make, and it worked at first. The Trojans saw the armor and fell back in panic. Patroclus led the Myrmidons forward, and the Greeks, suddenly reinvigorated, swept the enemy away from the ships. He should have stopped there. He did not stop. He pushed on toward Troy itself, and the gods turned against him. Apollo struck him from behind, dazing him. A Trojan warrior named Euphorbus speared him, and then Hector arrived and delivered the final blow. Patroclus died in the armor of Achilles, outside the walls of Troy. When the news reached Achilles, his grief was like nothing described anywhere else in the Iliad. He collapsed. He tore his hair and smeared himself with ash. Antilochus, the messenger who brought the news, held Achilles' hands because he feared that Achilles, in his anguish, might take his own life. What do you do with a grief like that? What do you do when the person you loved most is gone, and you could have prevented it? Achilles had one answer. He was going to kill Hector. Now, at this point in the story, before we watch what happens next, we want to hear from you, because the rage of Achilles is something that still divides people. Was his fury justified? Or did his pride, his refusal to fight when his countrymen needed him, make him partly responsible for Patroclus' death? Leave your answer in the comments. We read every one. Achilles needed new armor. His was on Hector's back. Thetis went to Hephaestus, and the god worked through the night, crafting a new set, a breastplate, a helmet, greaves, and the famous shield of Achilles, which Homer describes at extraordinary length, a world in miniature hammered into metal, cities at war and at peace, harvests, weddings, the ocean running around the rim. At dawn, Achilles walked back into the war. What followed was not really a battle. It was more like a force of nature. Achilles drove through the Trojan lines with the kind of fury that had no strategy in it. Just grief turned into motion. He killed so many Trojans that their bodies, according to Homer, dammed the flow of the river Scamander. The river god himself rose up against Achilles, and even that was not enough to stop him. He wanted Hector. Hector had spent the day inside Troy. His parents begged him to stay behind the walls. His father, King Priam, knew what it meant for Achilles to return. His mother pleaded, but Hector had been the man who stripped Patroclus of that armor, who sent the Greeks reeling. He could not hide now, not from this. Hector waited at the Scaean gates of Troy. When Achilles appeared, something shifted in him. He ran. 3 times Achilles chased Hector around the walls of Troy. The gods watched. Some of them intervened. Apollo kept Hector in front, just far enough ahead. But the gods had already made their decision. Troy was going to fall, and Hector was going to die. Athena appeared to Hector in the form of his brother Deiphobus, the person he trusted most. She told him they could face Achilles together. Hector believed her and stopped. He turned around. He proposed something to Achilles, that whoever won the duel should return the other's body for burial. A question of honor. A final attempt to keep some humanity in what was about to happen. Achilles said no. He said his rage was beyond that. He said with a fury that Homer records without judgment that he would eat Hector raw if he could. The duel was brief. Achilles hurled his spear and missed. Hector threw his spear and hit Achilles' shield with no effect. Hector turned to his brother for another lance and found no one there. He understood then. The gods were gone. He was alone. He charged. He pulled out his sword and ran straight at Achilles because there was nothing else left to do. Because dying on your feet with a weapon in your hand was the only kind of death a man like Hector could accept. Achilles knew the armor, knew exactly where it was vulnerable because it had been his armor first, taken from Patroclus. He drove his spear through Hector's throat. As Hector was dying, he prophesied Achilles' own death. Paris and Apollo would bring him down at the Scaean gates. Achilles didn't flinch. He knew. He had always known. What Achilles did after that was not honorable. He tied Hector's body by the heels to his chariot and dragged it around the walls of Troy day after day. The Trojans watched from the walls. Hector's wife Andromache watched. His parents watched. The gods were offended, but they protected Hector's body from decay so that when Priam finally came, alone at night, to Achilles' tent, an old man begging for his son. The body was still whole. That scene is one of the strangest in the entire Iliad. Two men who had every reason to hate each other, sitting together. Priam saw in Achilles his dead son. Achilles saw in Priam his aging father. They wept, and Achilles gave the body back. He knew by then that his own death was close. The arrow came from Paris. Paris, who had started all of this by taking Helen, who had never been much of a warrior, who needed the god Apollo to guide his aim. It found Achilles at the Scaean gates, exactly where Hector had said it would. Achilles died where the prophecy said he would die, doing what the prophecy said he would do, at the age the prophecy had always pointed toward. And here is what the archaeologists and historians have quietly noted. Underneath all the myth, the city of Troy was real. Heinrich Schliemann found it in 1868 at a site now called Hisarlik in modern Turkey. 9 cities, one on top of another, the 7th layer showing signs of violent destruction around the 12th century before Christ, which is exactly when the Greeks said the war happened. There may have been a real conflict. There may have been a real warrior whose legend grew into Achilles over centuries of retelling. The Iliad itself, in its earliest layers, shows Achilles suffering wounds, not suddenly dropping dead from an arrow to the ankle. The invincibility came later. The myth grew. What the myth preserved was something true anyway, not about a man who could not be killed, but about a man who refused to be forgotten. He chose glory over years. He walked onto a battlefield knowing the outcome, and he fought anyway. That choice, not the heel, not the arrow, is what 3,000 years of readers have not been able to let go of. Was he invincible? No. He was something harder to explain than that. He was a man who decided what his life was worth and paid the price without flinching. We want to thank you for staying with this story until the end. The history waiting in our next video is every bit as intense as what you just saw. An empire, a betrayal, and a collapse that nobody saw coming. Do not miss it. Subscribe. There are many more of these to come.